Dobré odpoledne, dámy a pánové. Následující panel bude v angličtině vzhledem k přítomnosti zahraničního hosta, byť minimálně rozumí česky, pozor. Tak prosím ty z vás, kteří potřebují, aby použili překlad. And now let's switch to English. The next panel should be about the future of the EU. I'm glad that we are also discussing future and Czech part in shaping EU's future, because unfortunately lots of debate in this country is about should we be inside or outside of the EU, which to my opinion is absurd question. We should be discussing what kind of EU do we want, what are Czech priorities, how to achieve them, and so on and so forth. And this, at least partly, we will do over the next hour and a half. So at the panel we have Eric Maurice, who's former editor-in-chief of EU Observer, the newspaper or journal most of you, I guess, know, and who now is director of Brussels office of Fondation Schuman, respected and well-known think tank both in Paris and Brussels. And as you may have noticed, we don't have Milena Hrdinková, but we have Igor Blahušiak, who's director of the Department of European Affairs Communication at the Office of the Government of the Czech Republic. For those of you who are interested in State Secretary Madame Hrdinková views about the EU, let me say that right now at our sister server Aktuálně CZ, I'm Ondřej Houska from Hospodářské noviny, sorry I haven't introduced myself. At our sister website Aktuálně CZ we have published an interview with State Secretary for EU Affairs Milena Hrdinková about her views of the Czech EU policy and EU in general. For example, she's convinced that Britain will not leave the EU. So let's see. I don't know if this is the official position of the government. We'll see. So now I would like to ask both of you for 5 to 10 minute introduction to this topic, the future of the EU, with special emphasis on the French-German engine and the role of Czechia in the future of the EU. Please, Eric.
Thank you. Dobrý den. I will start with something you all know probably about France and Germany and the EU, is that the EU was built on not only the Franco-German reconciliation, but also the Franco-German political impetus and political engine, as I think it's known in the title of this debate. The situation now is that this engine is more necessary than before. First, because we are in a time when new decisions have to be taken for the future of the EU. We are going out of a few crises, like migration crisis, the financial crisis, Brexit, if Brexit happens. I'm still convinced it will happen, but I'm less sure since last week, actually, but I'm still betting on it. And the future of the EU is also probably rethinking competition policies, industrial policies, probably at some point reopening the treaties, even if few people are motivated for that, but that probably will be necessary. So there are many reasons why the Franco-German is necessary for the future of the EU, and another important reason is that today, if you look at the map, the political map of the EU, there is no other player around France and Germany. I mean, no other which with the political weight to shape decisions. The UK is leaving. Spain, which will have elections at the end of this month, is still exiting the crisis and still wondering what this country should be. We have the crisis in Catalonia and also the economic and social issues which are not solved yet. Italy is going further away from the core of the EU. It's a founding country, but it's not playing the EU game anymore. Poland is not a founding country, but it's in the same dynamics with a government which is not putting itself at the center of the EU. And then we have groupings of countries like the Visegrad 4 countries, like what is called the Hanseatic League of countries, which goes from the Netherlands to Northern Europe on some issues, mainly economic, fiscal issues. But in this void around France and Germany, these groupings don't have a real coherence in political visions, in political propositions. I guess we won't agree on that, but that's one element that has to be taken into account in the discussions. So the Franco-German engine is more necessary not than before, but it's very necessary. But it's not sufficient anymore. Because, as I said, there are these groupings of countries which have their perspectives, their interests, but and make more difficult the decision making. I don't mean it in a negative sense, being more difficult, because that's part of the EU workings to discuss and to try to find compromise. But that makes the Franco-German bilateral decisions less than before sufficient to take EU decisions. And the other situation we face now is that France and Germany have more and more problems to agree on things and to share the same visions. For many years it was France that was lacking the political willingness, or at least the political momentum to propose things and to be active. That was the case especially with the previous president, François Hollande. And now we have a president who is very active, who puts on the table a lot of ideas, which can be right or wrong, that has to be discussed, but at least he's making propositions, much more than his predecessors. But now it's Germany which is not reacting, which is not engaging into the bilateral discussions. It took more than 6 months for Macron to have a minimum agreement on Eurozone reform with Germany, and then 6 months later it was even more watered down in the Council of the EU, also because of the opposition from this Hanseatic League of countries. We saw that the taxation of digital platforms, France and Germany were the two countries putting the idea forward, and then Germany said, well, no, we are not interested anymore, so the EU had to scale down these propositions. And now we see that after the last battery of Macron's propositions, Merkel did not even reply. It was Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer who replied, who basically said no to everything except to building aircraft carrier, which means nothing because France and Germany would have to agree on some military doctrine, which is not going to happen soon. And she even went further, asking the French to give back their seats in the UN Security Council and to abandon the EU Parliament seat in Strasbourg, which no French president would accept. So we see that the Franco-German engine is not working anymore. But the problem is that without this engine, there is no power in the EU, no energy. So I could make a pun in saying that the EU needs renewable energies to complete at least the Franco-German engine, but we are still looking for it, and that's probably one of the main challenges that the EU will be facing with these elections, the nomination of the new Commission, and the work with the next Parliament.
Thank you, Eric. The discussion is ongoing. What reforms are necessary after Brexit? What changes does the EU need? What should be done? What's the Czech Republic's position? Igor Blahušiak.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Sorry for Miss Hrdinková. She had another engagements that couldn't be taken care of another way, so I'm here instead of her. But I will try to show you basically that the Czech Republic does have a European vision. And I will also try to show you that it is not only part of the V4, but it's also active part of S3 format, I mean Slavko format with Austria and Slovakia, and also Czech Republic and our section and office of government and all the civil servants are always trying to build other alliances with other countries, not only just sticking to V4, but we also are trying to find new partners and trying to build new long-lasting relationships. So we had this question debated on National Convention. I think it was two months ago. So basically, just the first remark, personal remark. Czech Republic is not only a V4 country, but it is also cooperating and open European country, open to cooperation with other partners. As for our priorities and also, generally speaking, debate on the future of the Europe, speaking on behalf of the Czech government, I can say that we welcome the discussion on priorities about strategic agenda, which will happen in summit in Sibiu. But we think that it is important to evaluate outputs, actually, of the whole discussion and previous debate about the future of the EU. This process started in Bratislava, then it lasted some time, and we had fruitful discussion, but you may feel that the delivery and the outputs of this discussion is somewhat lacking. We think that priorities, or not all the priorities of the 2014 strategic agenda have been met. For example, we can look at the state of the single market, which is not completed yet, or we can look at the issues connected with digital single market. That's why we think that for the future, the next strategic agenda of the European Council needs to be equipped with throughout follow-up mechanism in order to make sure that our common goals will be achieved as quickly as possible. Also, we think that considering the reality of the EU now, when we are just a few weeks ahead of very important European elections, and also in the turmoil of Brexit happening, delivering, or not happening, whatever you think, we think that Sibiu summit should send out a clear message of the unity of the European Union, because this message will be very important to citizens. You may see that European citizens, I'm not speaking only about the Czech Republic, but also generally, are a bit confused and are not so satisfied with delivering concrete results done by the European Union. That's why we need to find a clear conclusion of the Bratislava process without creating any disillusions, and then trying to move forward. As for our priorities, I mean Czech government priorities for Sibiu, these were debated very inclusively on various formats, not only speaking about national convention that we held two weeks ago, and today recommendations for the Czech government made by the participants of the roundtable for dealing with priorities for Sibiu were published. These recommendations, for example, recommend that EU should provide a concrete answer to citizens who have expressed their concerns about the Union's ability to handle security and socio-economic issues, and also the key emphasis of the new strategic agenda should be on functional single market with 4 freedoms and no further barriers being created. Among the other themes that were mentioned by participants of this roundtable, I can name, for example, open international trade, working industrial policy. Also, the EU should focus on challenges related to digitalization and artificial intelligence. Issues like cybersecurity, security of networks, and also security as such with external border protection and proper functioning of Schengen will be also of our very high importance. If you look at Bratislava process, there were some suggestions how should the European integration look like. There were suggestions like creating two-speed Europe or something like that. I think that broadening consensus in whole EU is very important, and the Czech government is convinced that there are areas where added value can be only achieved at the European Europe. I think the question should not be like if we need more Europe or less Europe. The question should be, or the answer should be, we need better Europe. Better Europe that actually fulfills the expectations of the citizens. And in achieving this, we should focus on best use of possible and existing legal frameworks and instruments. We should not be creating another 10 years of academic discussion, and this is my personal view, academic discussions on reforms of the treaties, for example, that we experienced with the European Constitution. And basically, from my personal point of view, these 10 years were lost, and we had to focus on concrete policy delivery rather than debating and devoting our time to institutional issues. And if you look at the Brexit issue, we share Donald Tusk's view that the long extension provides more certainty and predictability because it removes threat of constantly shifting cliff edge dates. Also, this longer extension would allow our British friends to maybe rethink their Brexit strategy. And I think the flag extension, however, is not the solution itself. And instead of frequent meetings of the European Council in the Article 50 format, which is disturbing a limited capacity to tackle other urgent issues, we should be devoting more of our time to the concrete policy issues that I mentioned previously. So the months until October, when speaking about Brexit, are a unique opportunity for the UK to seize the situation constructively, because neither of us nor the UK can afford wasting any more time. So basically, this is for the opening, and I'm glad to hear your views, maybe comments on this. Thank you.
Thank you. We have heard a few priorities of the Czech government regarding the future of the EU. Eric, how's the view in Brussels? Is the Czech Republic perceived as an active player in the shaping of the EU's future, or is it irrelevant or non-existent entity because the views of or because the country cannot express its views? Thanks.
Yeah, I think it was interesting to hear Mr. Blahušiak starting with the fact that Czech Republic is not only V4, because that's obviously the view in Brussels and everywhere.
Yeah, that was my next question, actually.
Sorry?
Yeah, that was my next question, because Mr. Blahušiak was at pains stating that we are not just the V4, but is it also the view in Brussels, or is it only a wishful thinking of Czech diplomats? Connected to my first question, let's say.
Well, at least in the last almost 4 years now, because the V4 group was not so visible or influential before the migration crisis. It was active, I think, mainly on issues linked to the budget, to cohesion policies, to economic issues, probably. But with migration issues, the migration crisis, it went into the territory of highly political issues. And that's why first V4 has become so visible, and why if you look at the 4 countries of this group, Poland is obviously, by its size, it's a specific country in the V4. Hungary, because of its prime minister, is also a specific case. And then you have the Czech Republic and Slovakia, which are mid-size countries in the EU, and which don't seem to have, at least viewed again from Brussels and some other countries, which don't seem to have a proper voice into the V4 group. And then it's difficult for the Czech Republic to have its own voice, its own influence in the discussions in Brussels, especially because I think the government coalitions were not so strong in Czech Republic. So I think it was difficult for the previous governments to have a clear also expression. Well, you were there, so you should know better than me, but it was probably difficult for the government to have a clear view of what it wanted, because it was divided here in Prague. And now the Prime Minister is more vocal, maybe more active, but he was seen as a one-issue minister when he was finance minister. It was linked to fiscal policies, VAT policies. And as a prime minister, he's maybe not, I would say, organized enough in his in the expression of his political priorities to be taken as a main players in the European Council. That said, and I understood that from the previous panel here, in budget discussions, every member state will have its place in the discussions, and I understood that Czech Republic will have its own priorities, its own expression, and that could be, if it can be part of the solution, because of course it's a very difficult puzzle to put into place. And what I heard from the previous panel, I understand that the Czech Republic will be active in finding these solutions, so that could be an opportunity to maybe to be better heard in Brussels.
As Eric just said, sometimes Czech Republic, Czech position, Czech government was a bit divided, or maybe the position sometimes was a bit confusing. Prime Minister Ondřej Babiš changed his view on common EU defense like 3 times so far, I think. When he was finance minister, he supported very actively the view of the then government which was in support. After becoming prime minister, he again, let's say, repeated this stance since last August, I guess. All of a sudden, Czech Republic is against strengthening the common defense, projects like PESCO and so on and so forth. So if you could please, I'm not asking you to comment on the Prime Minister's comments, of course, but this is, I guess, significant detail of the functioning of the Czech EU policy, also taking into account the fact that we heard in the previous panel, namely that Czech citizens, according to surveys, put a lot of emphasis on strengthening of security and defense on the EU level. So what's the Czech view on that, actually?
It's not my specialty, so I will be just commenting in broad sense. You're right in the fact that if we look at the sentiment in the Czech people, if we ask them about the highest priorities or what they are expecting from the EU to deliver, then the security, peace, and these issues will be on the top of their lists. Actually, people are not so much obsessed with migration, but they are more looking in providing peace, security, and then economic welfare. This is what they are expecting from the European Union. And I think the Czech government, generally speaking, has its clear stance that we are cooperating in PESCO. We were, if we go to the basics of PESCO, we were one of the members that were at the beginning of this cooperation. So, from my point of view, yes, there might be some statements that might be viewed in opposite direction, but I don't think this is a change of general approach to this matter. And Czech Republic still supports, for example, PESCO.
So maybe we'll have a definitive answer when the Prime Minister changes his view for the fourth time. Eric, historically, one of the biggest priorities of the Czech Republic was the completion of the single market. We have heard this also a few minutes ago from Mr. Blahušiak. In the current situation in the EU, is it realistic to hope for something like that happening? Because if you look at, I don't know, Mr. Macron's priorities, also if you look at the discussion in Germany, things like the completion of the single market or single market for services are not very prominent. So is there any hope for like-minded countries like the Czech Republic, the Netherlands, some other countries to actually achieve that, maybe in next 5 years with the next European Commission?
Well, it will be one of the main topics of the next 5 years, that's for sure, especially I think there was a letter from like 21 countries recently on these issues, including the Czech Republic. And obviously France and Germany were not signatories of this letter. The main problem with that is, I think, the different perspectives on how to complete the single market. One perspective would be mainly economic, with the ambition to allow economic flows, activities everywhere in the EU for companies, for small companies, for individuals. And that's how I understand the idea of delivering a functional single market. But there is also another view, which of course is mainly supported by Emmanuel Macron, also for domestic reasons, and we saw that in the last few months in France. It's the social dimension of the EU, and of course, and therefore of the single market. One of the most disputed directive in the European Parliament and within the member states in the last 5 years was the directive on posted workers. There was another one which was adopted by the Parliament last month, which was called the mobility package, which was for the posted workers, but in lorries, in the transports. And in these occasions, we saw that there were many very deep differences, not only between parties in the Parliament, but also between nationalities of MEPs and also between countries in the Council. And when we look at Macron's letter last month, this proposition to think about some not the creation of a minimum wage at EU level, but at least some criteria to have a kind of minimum wage in all EU members. When we look at the discussions on how a Eurozone budget could be implemented and how big it should be, what kind of tasks it should fulfill, we see that there are two very different visions, one economic, one social, that have to be combined if we want the EU to work. But politically, the views are so much different from one country to the other. And I would not say one problem, but one element is that for countries like, I think, the Czech Republic, or at least the V4 countries as a group, this question of salaries of posted workers is seen as an element of competitiveness for countries. And for other countries, mostly in the western part of the EU, mostly France, and to some extent the Benelux, Southern Europe as well, this dimension of salary and posted workers is seen as an element of unfair competition, internal competition within the EU, and a factor of social unrest in these countries. So that makes this discussion even more difficult, because there is there are real political stakes for the governments and for the for the functioning of their society within this discussion on the single market, how it should work, and how convergent the different labor market should be.
Is Mr. Blahušiak, is the Czech government willing and able to let's say, agree a compromise solution in order to achieve progress in some other area? Because as regards posted workers, for example, Czech Republic, contrary to Poland and Hungary, voted for the deal. On the other hand, when it comes to minimum wage, indexed, of course, to GDP per capita or to cost of living, it's not a single wage for the EU 27. Czech politicians are not in favor. Isn't it necessary to be able to compromise in social dimension in order to achieve progress in the completion of the internal market?
Yes, as you rightly mentioned, we were able to find a compromise on some issues. On the other issues, there are diverging views, not among the position of the Czech Republic and the other member states, but also we see that there are issues that we hear diverging viewpoints on them from many other actors. So maybe the question should not be posted not only if the Czech government is able to compromise, because naturally Czech government is defending the best solution that is best and best suited for the Czech people and Czech Republic itself. But maybe we can look at also at what the participants of the National Convention on Priorities for Sibiu said. They were discussing the possible scenarios for the functioning of the EU for the future, and they all agreed that, or virtually all agreed, that the EU should maybe do less but better. So maybe the question is whether we should be trying to push politically sensitive issues and looking at the citizen support and looking at general public, the issues that are not so clear in many times to real experts. And I think we should focus on maybe the issues that are relevant to the most of the citizens. So maybe the questions should not look like if the Czech Republic is able to compromise, but I think we should pose a question what the EU should do if the initiatives that we know from the beginning will not be generally accepted, and these initiatives will cause rifts that might be perceived as unnecessary by some actors. We might pose ourselves question if really it is important and if we really do need these kind of initiatives.
Now let's go to your questions. There's a question on Slido. By the way, you can all use Slido, typing Slido, slide.do, yeah, you know that probably. And then using the hashtag ED2019. There is one question about the influence of small or smaller states from Central and Eastern Europe. Which of them are influential in Brussels or inside the EU, and if there is a country from this region that can teach us something or teach us how to be more influential. So I'll ask the question first to the representative of the Czech government. Is there a country from our region that we observe with envy, let's say?
Yeah, that's a nice question. Okay, let's start with small eastern country. Basically,
not just small, because Czech Republic actually is not, not a small country at all. We're 11th biggest. 11th biggest out
what
of
I wanted
28.
to say. We are not small country. Czech Republic is not small country. It's the middle-sized country. That's first a very popular mistake when labeling the Czech Republic. Also, Czech Republic is not the easternmost country. It's also not a new country. We are members of the European Union for 15 years. So I think this kind of labeling is somewhat outdated. We are a full-fledged member of the European Union. Sitting at the same table with other member countries. So basically what we are trying to do is to defend our national interests and European interests with the best possible way. And I will prefer not to name any country from the 2004 accession, if you want, or 2007 accession, or any other accession, because I think for the Czech Republic the best would be to be example for other countries. So what we are trying to do is to be in the position of being an example for other countries.
Eric, is the Czech Republic perceived as an example for other countries in Brussels? And if not, is there a country out of the, let's say, last 3 enlargements that is even better than us?
I would give my personal feeling first, so that will help for the other view. My personal feeling is that, of course, the Czech Republic is doing as good as it can. No, I mean, I have spoken with many diplomats and people in Prague and in Brussels, and I know that it's not as easy to combine the constraints put by a public opinion which has shifted on the EU since the accession, because the expectations were probably too high. The Czech governments also have to to do with, and I totally agree with what you said about these old member states, new member states, and that's one of the main problems, I think, is that the member states that were forming the EU in 2004 expected the new countries, well, new at the moment, to accept everything from the acquis to the political views and to the way of working and so on, and that we are still in this state of mind. And I agree totally that when there is some kind of priority expressed by one of these countries, it's the first reaction in Brussels and in many capitals is to say, oh, they are not playing the game. So it can be more nuanced than that, but that's one big element to take into account in the atmosphere between Czech Republic, the regions countries, and the rest of the EU. And I would add also that Jean-Claude Juncker, who I think has qualities on many points, has not been that interested in the region as well, and that there was from the top of EU institutions a lack of maybe not interest, but at least understanding of the dynamics of the region and how people think here. That being said, if you look from Brussels, I would say that the good pupil. I don't remember how exactly you described that in your question, but I think Slovakia is probably the good pupil because it's in the Eurozone, which is a big factor to be part, to be a full member of the club. Within the V4, depending on the Prime Minister, or even depending on the priorities of the Prime Minister at the time, Slovakia has more or less been cooperative in all the discussions. It helped a lot that Slovakia had the EU presidency at one critical moment for the relations between V4 and the EU. So of course Slovakia is at least in its dealings with the institutions and other member states probably more positively viewed from Brussels. That said, there are many problems, domestic problems. We saw that last year with the murder of the journalist and the resignation of the Prime Minister. But also to react to the previous question, I think you mentioned that the Czech Republic is the 11th country. It has as many MEPs as Belgium, for instance. Luxembourg is a much smaller country, and still it is more influent. One reason, of course, is that Belgium or Luxembourg or other countries are at least founding members or older members, but also that they are more willing and more able to form coalition or at least alliances outside of their comfort zone, probably. Belgium, Luxembourg have, of course, the Benelux. Historically, they have France and Germany as well, but they are also able to reach out to other countries, probably from other regions. And I would say that for the Czech Republic to leave this position of being a new member state, a V4 member states, a smaller member states, it should be more active into discussing with the others, and not only to the three other V4 members or to Germany or to France, which has been the case in the last few months. Probably it should be more active in Brussels and in the bilateral relationships, which we see despite the fact that many, of course, the main decisions are taken in Brussels. Bilateral relations are still very, very important in the EU.
I'll take another one from Slido because it's connected to our region again. How should the EU deal with non-democratic tendencies in member states, situations like in Poland or Hungary? Sorry, Mr. Blahušiak, what's actually the Czech view on the processes on the EU level regarding Poland and Hungary. We know that there's Article 7 procedure regarding Poland. European Parliament voted in favor of launching the same procedure with Hungary. With government, when there was the government of Prime Minister Sobotka formed, we know that ANO party of Mr. Babiš was also part of the coalition. Diplomats usually said, okay, in case there's a vote on Poland, we will probably support Commission's point of view. Is it still the case with the current government?
Well, the current government very carefully monitors the situation and very carefully follows all the discussions, not only on the council level, but also all the discussions in the European Parliament that were also, I think, held during the last plenary. So we are monitoring the situation. I think, from my personal point of view, it's quite sad that this kind of procedure had to be activated. But if we look at the ultimate solution, or if we look from at the situation as such, I think our position is quite clear that we are clearly respecting the European values. We are active member of the European Union, so basically this is some kind of starting point for our conclusion on any maybe votes that might happen in future if they happen. I will try not to be some kind of fortune teller, futurologist, if the vote actually happens, or what the procedure will look like, because this is some kind of academic debate, and also it is on our Polish and Hungarian friends how they will deal with this issue. So this is basically on their side to really try to maybe end this procedure. But as I said, Czech Republic is fully committed to the European values, and I think this is a stance that will not be changed.
Eric, many politicians from our region, meaning Central and Eastern Europe, complain that there's some kind of bias in Brussels against this region, that there are procedures either ongoing or maybe in the pipeline against countries like Poland, Hungary, Romania, but there is a lot to be improved also in Western Europe. So is this criticism justified from your point of view? Is there really any kind of bias?
It's difficult to answer. I don't think there is a bias. Of course, you can have many issues with the justice system in countries. I mean, France is very often condemned by the European Court of Human Rights for problems with the justice system. I know that many people wanted Spain, for instance, to be put under some monitoring because of the government's handling of the Catalan situation. But still, everyone sees that there is a change in the way Poland, Hungary, Romania are governed or organized. And even within these countries, there are many people who think so. So I don't think there is a bias. We also saw that Malta was pointed at by the European Parliament, but also by Frans Timmermans, the European Commissioner who is in charge of these issues of the rule of law. So it's not only Eastern countries. If we look at party affiliations, it's from different parties as well. So it means that every political family in the EU has internal problems to solve relating to this issue. What we can see is that the Article 7 procedure, which was launched against Poland and which the Parliament wants to be launched against Hungary, is probably too political. It's launched by the Commission. Well, in the case of Poland, it was launched by the Commission, so it could be seen as an administrative or at least a legalistic issue, but the way it is handled by the Council, the fact that in the case of Hungary, it's the Parliament asking for the procedure to be launched, it gives it a political dimension, which of course is always open to the accusation of bias. But the fact is that this political dimension has led to no real result. The only thing that made the Polish government move was the European Court of Justice. And so that we see we don't need to be too political to be efficient when dealing with the rule of law issue. It's, the EU is based on legality, it's based on law, and we can or at least we can give a bigger role to the European Court of Justice. And that's why maybe the discussions on how to link the state of the rule of law with cohesion policies or the other elements of the EU budget can be a good idea, because very often we see that the meddling in the justice system is linked to the way EU money is used. We see that in Romania, for instance, or in Hungary. But linking it in the discussions for the budget and wanting to put a mechanism on that probably would give more credit to the accusation of being biased. So that's a very tricky tool to put in place.
We'll see what happens. There are proposals for reforming the articles, or let's say changing the Article 7 procedure. But now, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions orally.